April 10th, 1945, 9:47 p.m. Berlin. Deep beneath the Reich Chancellery, in a bunker that smelled of damp concrete and desperation, Adolf Hitler stood before a radio encoder. His hands trembled, not from fear, from rage. The war was dying, everyone knew it. Soviet artillery echoed in the distance, growing closer each day. American and British forces swept across Germany from the west. The 1,000-year Reich had shrunk to a few kilometers of rubble and denial. But Hitler had one final victory planned, one last act of absolute control. He leaned toward the microphone. An SS officer sat ready with pencil and encoding pad. The words Hitler spoke next would travel as electrical pulses through copper wire, transformed into seemingly random number groups, transmitted to concentration camp commandants across what remained of Nazi Germany. Operation Ense, Hitler said. His voice was hoarse from screaming at generals who no longer believed his promises of secret weapons and miraculous counteroffensives. Kein Zeuge darf überleben zu zeugen. Not one witness shall survive to testify. The SS officer's pencil scratched across the pad. He didn't look up, didn't react. In the Reich's final days, every order was insane. This one was just more insane than most. Hitler continued, speaking in clipped, precise German that left no room for misinterpretation. Every concentration camp prisoner must die before Allied soldiers could liberate them. The commandants had 48 hours from the moment Allied forces approached within 10 kilometers. Not one survivor, not one testimony, not one photograph of what had happened in those camps. At 10:14 p.m. the transmission went out. Radio towers near Potsdam sent the signal bouncing across Europe, to Bergen-Belsen, to Dachau, to the subcamps whose names most Germans had never heard. The message was simple. Evil always is. Kill them all. Leave no witnesses. April the 12th, 1945, 2:13 a.m. British intelligence station, northern Germany. A young cryptographer named Arthur Pembridge worked through intercepts from 2 nights prior. The German military codes had become sloppy in recent weeks. Desperate, easier to break. This particular message had been flagged as high priority, sent simultaneously to 43 different receiving stations. Pembridge worked through the number groups, consulting his codebooks. The words that emerged made him stop breathing. Operation Ense, immediate liquidation of all concentration camp prisoners upon Allied approach within 10-kilometer radius. Deadline, 48 hours from proximity threshold. He read it 3 times to make sure he hadn't made an error. Then he ran to wake his commanding officer. By 6:30 a.m., the decoded message sat on Field Marshal Montgomery's desk. By 8 a.m., Montgomery had called an emergency meeting. The briefing room smelled of cigarette smoke and wet wool. Rain hammered against the windows. Around the table sat the officers who would need to make decisions. British Colonel Pemberton, a veteran of North Africa with a face like weathered stone. American General Harrison, who'd fought from Normandy and had the exhausted eyes to prove it. Canadian General Guy Simons, quiet and calculating. "Gentlemen," Montgomery said, "we have a problem." He read the decoded message aloud. Nobody interrupted. When he finished, the silence stretched. Pemberton spoke first. "How many prisoners are we talking about?" An intelligence officer consulted his notes. Bergen-Belsen complex, 3 connected camps. Most recent estimates put the number at 45,000. 45,000. Harrison said it like he was testing the weight. "And how long until our advance puts us within 10 kilometers? At current pace, 96 hours, April 16th. The math was brutal and simple. The Allies would trigger the execution deadline just by doing their jobs, by advancing, by winning the war. Montgomery looked at the map. Bergen-Belsen sat like a dark spot on the paper, 14.7 kilometers behind German defensive lines. Conventional assault options? Pemberton leaned forward. Full bombardment followed by ground assault. We soften defences with artillery for 12 hours, send in infantry to clear resistance building by building. Timeline, 72 hours minimum. Nobody needed to say what that meant. 72 hours was too long. Harrison added his assessment. We could divert armour and infantry from the main advance, hit them fast and hard, but that means pulling resources from our primary offensive. Timeline, maybe 48 hours. Still not fast enough. The room fell silent. Outside, artillery rumbled, the sound of a war almost won, except for these 45,000 people who would die because winning took time. Pemberton stubbed out his cigarette. Then we're discussing the impossible. We cannot save 45,000 people in 72 hours. This is war, gentlemen, not a rescue operation. We advance as planned, Harrison said. His voice was cold, factual. We push forward. We take ground. We liberate whoever is still alive when we get there. The words hung in the air like smoke, but there was one person in that room who hadn't spoken yet. Lieutenant Colonel David Margolis stood in the back corner, so still he was almost invisible. He was 34 years old, but looked older. Thin face, tired eyes, the kind of man who blended into backgrounds. He wasn't supposed to be at this meeting. This was for tactical planners, combat commanders. Margolis was a logistics officer. He counted boxes, he organized supply convoys. He'd only ended up here because he'd been delivering a supply report when the meeting started, and Montgomery's aide had told him to stay rather than interrupt. So he stood in the corner and listened to generals explain why 45,000 people had to die. And something inside him broke. Because Margolis knew what those numbers meant. He didn't see statistics, he saw faces, his mother's face, last letter from Warsaw, 1942. They're taking us, David. Don't search for us. Live. His uncles, his aunts, his cousins. 16 family members gone into silence that meant death. For 3 years, Margolis had survived by turning grief into numbers. He'd become obsessed with logistics because logistics was control. If he could account for every ration box, every gallon of fuel, every round of ammunition, then maybe he could prevent another loss. His fellow officers called him the ledger behind his back, made jokes about his compulsive counting, his need to reconcile every inventory discrepancy, no matter how small. They didn't understand. 47 missing ration boxes wasn't just bad bookkeeping, it was 47 soldiers who might go hungry. And if soldiers went hungry, they made mistakes, and mistakes got people killed. Control the numbers, control fate. But now he was listening to Harrison say, "We advance as planned," like 45,000 deaths were just another acceptable casualty, and Margolis couldn't stay silent anymore. "Permission to speak, sir." Every head turned. Montgomery looked surprised. Margolis was even there. Pemberton frowned. "Colonel, this is a tactical planning session. Supply matters can wait." "This is a supply matter, sir. Moving 45,000 people is cargo logistics, not combat tactics." Harrison actually laughed, short, sharp, dismissive. "Cargo logistics? Colonel, we're discussing a fortified position with 700 SS guards." "With respect, sir, those guards are irrelevant if they're not there when we arrive." The room went very quiet. Montgomery leaned back. "Explain." Margolis moved to the table. His hands were shaking, so he pressed them flat against the map. Distance from Bergen-Belsen to Allied lines, 14.7 kilometers. Target 45,000 people. Available window, 5 hours. He was aware that every officer was staring at him like he'd lost his mind. He kept going. Standard truck capacity, 30 people packed tight. Naive calculation says we need 1,500 trucks. We don't have 1,500. The Canadian Supply Corps has 890. Pemberton started to interrupt, but Montgomery held up a hand. "But trucks can make multiple trips," Margolis continued, speaking faster. 14.7 kilometers at 40 kilometers per hour on rough roads takes 22 minutes one way, 44 minutes round trip. Add 5 minutes loading, 5 unloading, 54 minutes per cycle. He grabbed a pencil, started writing on the map corner. 5-hour window equals 300 minutes, divided by 54. Each truck makes 5.5 trips, round down to 5. 168 trucks times 5 trips equals 840 loads. 840 times 30 people equals 25,000 capacity. Pemberton shook his head. That's not even half. I'm not finished, sir. We reduce loading time to 3 minutes. Increase speed on empty returns to 50 kilometers per hour. Pack 35 people per truck. New calculation, 168 trucks times 6 trips times 35 people. 35,000 capacity. Still not enough. He could see Harrison starting to smile, ready to dismiss this. Then Margolis said, "But that assumes combat delay. Every 10 minutes of fighting equals approximately 150 prisoner executions based on historical data from camps we've liberated after combat. A 2-hour firefight means 1,800 minimum deaths before we even start evacuating. The conventional plan takes 72 hours. By the time our artillery stops, everyone inside is dead." Montgomery's expression changed. He was listening now. "So we don't fight," Margolis said quietly. "We make them abandon the camp before we arrive." Harrison's smile vanished. "Colonel, this is war. Germans aren't going to run away because we ask nicely. No, sir, they'll run because they think they're about to be overrun by 6,000 Allied soldiers." The room erupted. Impossible, absurd, fantasy. But Simons raised his voice. "Let him finish." Margolis swallowed hard. This was the moment. World War I, Battle of Megiddo. British forces fooled the Ottoman army with fake wooden tanks, drew them out of position with theatrical displays. We have better technology now. He looked around the table. Loudspeakers that can broadcast at 120 decibels. We've recorded tank exercises, artillery practice. We play those recordings and make it sound like an armored division approaching. Flares shot in patterns that look like artillery bombardment. Radio transmissions broadcasting fake tactical communications on German frequencies. His voice gained strength. It's April 1945. Germany has lost. Every SS officer knows it. They're not fighting for victory. They're trying to avoid war crimes tribunals. If we make them believe a massive force is about to capture them, they won't stand and fight. They'll run to save themselves. Pemberton stood up. "This is theatrical nonsense. Bergen-Belsen is defended by Waffen-SS. Combat veterans, they won't be fooled by speakers and fireworks." "They will if they're already terrified, sir. Fear doesn't require proof, it requires belief. And men who know they've committed atrocities believe they're about to face justice." Montgomery had been silent. Now he spoke. "What's your casualty projection, Colonel?" The question caught everyone off guard. Margolis took a breath. 2 scenarios. Scenario Alpha, conventional assault. Estimated Allied casualties, 2,800 killed and wounded. Estimated prisoner casualties, 18,000, primarily from crossfire and SS execution squads working against the clock. He paused. Scenario Bravo, psychological operation. Estimated Allied casualties, 5 to 12, primarily from vehicle accidents in darkness. Estimated prisoner casualties, 900 to 1,500, those too sick or weak to evacuate in the time frame. Pemberton's voice was sharp. "Those are fantasy numbers. Based on logistics, sir, I've coordinated movement of 340,000 tons of supplies across Europe. I know how long things take, I know what causes delays, and I know that artillery bombardment triggers execution protocols." Harrison leaned forward. "You're betting 45,000 lives on loudspeakers." "No, sir. I'm betting on German fear. On the fact that SS officers know the war is lost and they're running out of time to escape justice." Simons spoke. World War I, Megiddo. He's right about that. British forces used theatrical deception successfully. Montgomery drummed his fingers, studying the map, studying Margolis. Finally, "You have until April 14th, 6 p.m., to demonstrate proof of concept. 36 hours. Find a smaller target. Show me this works." Margolis felt hope and terror surge simultaneously. "If you succeed," Montgomery continued, "you get authorization for Bergen-Belsen. If you fail, it's court-martial for unauthorized use of military assets. Understood?" "Understood, sir." 36 hours, Colonel. God help you if you're wasting our time." Margolis saluted and left before anyone could change their minds. As he reached the door, Simons called out, "Colonel, sometimes you win wars with brains instead of bullets." Margolis nodded and stepped into the rain. April 13th, 1945, 9 p.m. Margolis sat alone in Supply Depot 7, surrounded by crates and the smell of diesel fuel. A single bulb illuminated his workspace, a battered table covered in maps and notebooks and calculations. 36 hours to prove the impossible. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat, took 3 breaths, forced himself to focus. This was what he was good at: logistics, numbers, finding solutions where others saw obstacles. He opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote, "How to make 734 men flee from recordings." Then he began to plan. April the 13th, 1945, 10:17 p.m. Margolis stood in a communications depot. Rows of radio gear lined the walls. In the corner, 12 loudspeaker units sat gathering dust. A signals corporal watched him with suspicion. "Sir, those speakers are scheduled for salvage. What do you need them for?" "Field broadcast exercises." The lie was technically true, just not the kind anyone would expect. The corporal shrugged. Margolis loaded speakers onto a handcart, 12 units, each capable of 115 decibels at 50 meters. Positioned correctly, they could blanket a camp perimeter with sound that would shake men's bones. But sound alone wasn't enough. He needed it to sound real. He pushed the cart into the night. Somewhere in the distance, actual artillery rumbled, the sound of the real war being won slowly, conventionally, with blood and time. Margolis didn't have time. He had 34 hours. April 14th, 1945, 1:30 a.m. The tank park was quiet except for idle diesel rumbles. Shermans and Cromwells sat in neat rows. Margolis approached the duty officer. "I need tanks to drive past recording equipment." The lieutenant blinked. "Sir?" "For 4 hours, back and forth, I need to record the sound." The lieutenant looked like he wanted to ask why, then decided he didn't want to know. "I'll need authorization." Margolis showed him paperwork signed by Simons. The general had authorized equipment access after the morning meeting. The lieutenant barely glanced before nodding. By 2 a.m., 3 Shermans were rolling across a muddy field while Margolis crouched beside recording equipment. Microphones captured every sound: the grinding shriek of metal treads, the deep diesel rumble, the squealing protest of bogie wheels under 30 tons. He recorded for 4.5 hours. When he played it back through loudspeakers, it sounded exactly like an armored division approaching. Perfect. April 14th, 1945, 9 a.m. The artillery range was preparing for bombardment practice. Margolis stood 200 meters back with recording equipment. A gunnery sergeant approached. "You need to clear the area, sir. Live fire in 10 minutes. "I know, I'm recording it." The sergeant looked at him like he was insane, then shrugged. The first shell screamed overhead at 9:14 a.m. The sound was visceral, a rising whistle ending in a ground, shaking boom. Margolis's equipment captured it all. He recorded 37 shells over 2 hours, different trajectories, different distances. When finished, He had a library of artillery sounds that could simulate a full bombardment, but he still needed German voices. April 14th, 1945, 2 p.m. Margolis found Corporal Dietrich Neumann in the medical tent, helping translate for wounded German prisoners. Neumann was 29, slight build, with careful movements of someone who'd learned to make himself invisible. He'd fled Bavaria in 1936, one step ahead of the Nuremberg laws. "Corporal Neumann, I need your help." Neumann looked up from bandaging a prisoner's hand. "Sir?" "I need you to record radio transmissions, in German. Commands that sound like SS officers coordinating a tactical withdrawal." The wariness in Neumann's eyes turned harder. "You want me to sound like them?" "Yes." "No." His voice was flat. "Ich werde nicht so tun, als wäre ich wie sie." "I will not pretend to be like them." Margolis pulled him aside. "In 32 hours, 45,000 people die in camps. Jewish prisoners, political prisoners, people like your family. Unless I can make SS guards believe they're being overrun and need to evacuate." Neumann's jaw tightened. "I need your voice," Margolis continued. "Perfect Hochdeutsch, SS officer accent, orders to fall back because they're surrounded. And if it doesn't work? Then I face court-martial and those 45,000 die anyway." Neumann stared at him, then, quietly, "What do you need me to say?" April 14th, 1945, 6:30 p.m. Everything was ready. Margolis had his recordings, his speakers, his flares requisitioned from artillery supplies. His plan existed on paper in precise detail. Now he had to prove it worked. There was a labor camp 8.4 kilometers from Allied positions, Camp Weissenberg. 400 prisoners, 41 guards. Margolis hadn't asked permission for this test. He was going to do it anyway. At 7 p.m. he gathered volunteers. 22 truck drivers from supply corps, 88 total soldiers counting speaker operators and flare teams. "Gentlemen," Margolis said, "tonight we're running a field exercise, evacuation drill. You'll drive to coordinates, load cargo, return to base." One driver, Private Lorne Mackenzie, raised his hand. "What kind of cargo, sir?" "The kind that needs to be moved quickly and carefully." They loaded into trucks and drove into gathering darkness. April 14th, 1945, 11:43 p.m. Camp Weissenberg sat in a clearing surrounded by pine forest, barbed wire, guard towers, barracks housing 400 people in conditions meant for 100. Margolis positioned loudspeakers 400 meters from the perimeter, hidden in tree line. Flare teams took positions forming a triangle, radio operator ready with transmitter and Neumann's recordings. The camp was quiet, guards in towers, prisoners locked in barracks. None knew what was about to happen. Margolis checked his watch. 11:43 p.m. He gave the signal. The first sound was low rumble, like distant thunder. It grew louder, grinding tank treads, diesel engines roaring. The noise came from the north, impossibly loud. In guard towers, men jerked upright, grabbed rifles, stared into darkness. Then the artillery started, recorded whistles and booms at 118 decibels. In darkness, with adrenaline flooding systems, guards couldn't tell the difference. The first flare ignited at 11:44 p.m. Brilliant orange burst 400 meters north, hung in the sky 30 seconds before burning out. 90 seconds later, another flare, red, 350 meters east. The pattern continued, flares walking closer, simulating artillery finding range. Tank sounds grew louder from multiple directions. Then Neumann's voice crackled across German military frequencies. "Achtung! Panzerabteilung erreicht Gitter 447. Infanterie vorrücken auf Gitter 502.
Alle Einheiten, Feindstärke geschätzt auf 6.000 Mann. Inside Weissenberg, chaos erupted. Guards ran from quarters half-dressed, Grabbing weapons, officers screamed contradictory orders. Man the perimeter! Fall back! Radio for reinforcements! The commandant, Hauptmann Friedrich Vogel, tried to organize defense, but his men were panicking. Some were already fleeing toward vehicles. At 11:52 p.m., 6 guards broke and ran into the forest. By midnight, tank sounds were overwhelming.
Flares lit the sky. Radio chatter spoke of massive Allied forces. Vogel stood in the command post trying to make sense of it. Something felt wrong. He heard tanks, but saw no muzzle flashes, heard artillery, but felt no concussion. But 89 of his guards had abandoned posts. The ones remaining were terrified, firing at nothing. At 12:03 a.m., Vogel made his decision. All units evacuate to Reinsdorf rally point. Leave the prisoners. The remaining guards fled. By 12:17 a.m., Camp Weissenberg stood silent. Gates open. Towers empty. Canadian trucks rolled through those gates at 12:19 a.m. Private Lorne Mackenzie jumped from his truck and stared. Barbed wire, watchtowers, barracks that looked built for animals. The smell hit before they stopped. Death and disease and human waste. Mackenzie killed the engine, jumped down. Boots hit mud. He reached the nearest barracks, put his hand on the door, hesitated. What if they thought he was SS? Then he remembered the briefing. Your delivery drivers, load cargo gently. He opened the door. Faces. Dozens of skeletal faces with enormous eyes staring from wooden bunks stacked 3 high. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Mackenzie's German was terrible, but he tried. Wir sind Canada. You are safe. Ihr seid sicher. Still nothing. Just hollow eyes watching. Then an older woman stood, helped another to her feet, took one shuffling step toward the door. Canada? Yes, Canada. We're taking you out. All of you. Schnell. The woman nodded, kept walking. Others began to move. Mackenzie and his medics helped them out. Gentle hands supporting people who weighed less than children. Bodies, mostly bones, loading them into the truck bed. 1, 5, 12, 20, 30. At 34, loading stopped. Margolis had been specific. Don't overload, keep to numbers. At 12:31 a.m., the first trucks departed. Loading time, 5 minutes 12 seconds. By 1:06 a.m., 400 prisoners were riding toward Allied lines. Not one shot fired, not one casualty. Margolis stood beside his command vehicle watching the last truck depart. His hands shook so badly he shoved them in his pockets. It had worked. Against all probability, it had actually worked. April 15th, 1945. 8 a.m. Margolis stood in Montgomery's office, exhausted, unshaven, smelling of diesel and sweat. On the desk lay photographs of freed prisoners, timeline documentation, guard testimonies. Montgomery studied the evidence in silence. Pemberton stood nearby, arms crossed. Finally, Montgomery spoke. You ran an unauthorized operation. Yes, sir. Requisitioned equipment under false pretenses. Yes, sir. Pemberton stepped forward. And you got lucky with local militia. Bergen-Belsen is defended by Waffen-SS elite troops who won't panic from theater. Montgomery tapped the casualty projection chart Margolis had presented 2 days ago, the one promising 5 to 12 casualties versus 3,000. Colonel, your numbers were theoretical then. You've now run one test. Does your projection still hold? Margolis met his eyes. Sir, the test validated the core assumption. Guards flee when they believe overwhelming force is imminent. Weissenberg had militia, Bergen-Belsen has Waffen-SS, but both are human, both fear the noose. He paused. My projection holds. 5 to 12 casualties, 98% survival rate, 5-hour timeline. Pemberton shook his head. Based on one lucky trial. Based on logistics, sir, and on the fact SS officers know what they've done. They're not fighting for victory, they're running from justice. Harrison had entered during this exchange. He'd been silent, listening. Now he spoke. Bergen-Belsen isn't Weissenberg. 3 connected camps, 734 guards, 45,000 prisoners. The scale introduces variables you can't control. That's correct, sir, which is why I need more trucks, more speakers, more flare teams. The method scales if we scale the resources. And if it fails, if guards realize it's a deception halfway through, then we have trucks on site for immediate evacuation of whoever we can save, and I face court-martial. Court-martial is the least of your concerns. Harrison leaned against the wall. If SS guards catch our trucks and panic, they'll execute prisoners as fast as they can pull triggers. You could cause a massacre. The words hung heavy. Margolis felt the weight. 45,000 lives balanced against a plan that sounded insane. Sir, he said quietly, the conventional assault guarantees 18,000 prisoner deaths minimum. That's not projection. That's documented data from every camp we've liberated through combat. He looked around. My method risks everything on one gamble, but if it works, we save 98%. If conventional assault works perfectly, we still lose 40%. Silence. Then Simon spoke from the doorway. The boy is right. I lost 340 men at Dieppe because the plan was conventional and Germans were ready for conventional. Sometimes you win by doing what the enemy doesn't expect. He looked at Montgomery. Margolis demonstrated his method works. His mathematics are sound. We're discussing the difference between definitely failing to save 20,000 versus possibly saving all of them. Montgomery drummed fingers. 30 seconds of silence. You have authorization for Bergen-Belsen, but understand, Colonel, if you fail, if this causes a massacre, you'll face court-martial, and I'll personally ensure you spend life in prison. Understood, sir. You have until April 16th, 11 p.m., to complete preparation. After that, you're committed. Yes, sir. Dismissed. As Margolis reached the door, Simons called, Colonel, don't prove me wrong. April 15th, 1945, 6:47 p.m. Margolis sat in the communications tent, updating plans, when the intelligence officer burst in. Sir, new intercept. Priority urgent. The decoded message was short and devastating. Hitler to Bergen-Belsen Commandant. If Allied forces approach within 5 kilometers, begin immediate liquidation. I want graves, not witnesses. 5 kilometers, not 10. Margolis stared at the message. 5 kilometers meant Allied forces would trigger execution threshold sooner. Much sooner. He grabbed calculations, started reworking numbers. Truck staging areas had to move from 6 kilometers back to 8.3. That added time to each round trip. 14 minutes per extra kilometer times 504 loads equals 118 hours additional time. Impossible unless he increased trucks, decreased round-trip time. Reduced loading time further. He worked through the night. At 3 a.m. he finally had numbers that worked. 201 trucks instead of 168. Tighter routes. Loading time reduced to 3 minutes. Drivers pushed harder. It would work. Barely. With no margin for error. One problem, Canadian Supply Corps didn't have 201 trucks, they had 173. Margolis sat staring at the shortfall. 28 trucks times 35 people equals 980 capacity. Nearly 1,000 people who wouldn't be saved because he was 28 trucks short. He thought about this 17 minutes, then he grabbed emergency requisition paperwork. Not exactly authorized by Simons, but not unauthorized either. A grey area he'd exploit and apologize for later. April 16th, 1945. 2:30 a.m. American Supply Depot, 12 kilometers south. Margolis walked in carrying paperwork requesting temporary loan of 33 trucks for priority Canadian logistics operation. The depot sergeant barely glanced before nodding. Everyone was too tired to care. The war was almost won. By 4 a.m., Margulis had his 201 trucks. April 16th, 1945. 11 a.m., the briefing area was packed. 2,411 soldiers in formation, drivers, medics, loaders, supply corps soldiers who'd never fired rifles in combat. Margulis stood before them. "Gentlemen, tonight you're not soldiers, you're delivery drivers." Confused looks. "Your job is simple. Drive to coordinates, load cargo, drive back, no heroics, no combat. If you encounter armed resistance, retreat immediately." He paused. "This is logistics. Speed and efficiency matter more than courage. Load people gently but quickly. 35 per truck. 3 minutes maximum. Drive safely but fast. Every minute saved is lives saved." The private raised his hand. "Sir, what if prisoners don't trust us?" "Speak calmly. Use whatever language you know. Tell them, Azad Sisha, you're safe. Then get them on trucks. They'll understand when trucks start moving toward freedom." More questions. Margulis answered with the same precision he brought to inventory management. Every contingency planned, every variable accounted. Standing there, looking at 2,000 faces, he felt the weight of what he was asking. Drive into enemy territory, load tortured, starved people. Do it in darkness while speakers blared and flares exploded. Trust that 734 SS guards would panic instead of fight. Trust that one Jewish logistics officer's mathematics would save 45,000 lives. It was insane. It was their only chance. April 16th, 1945, 6 p.m. 201 trucks departed for staging area 8.3 kilometers from Bergen-Belsen. Loudspeaker teams moved into position. Flare units readied 340 flares. Radio operators tested equipment. Neumann practiced commands one final time. Margulis sat in field command tent staring at a map studded with pins. Red for guard positions, blue for prisoner barracks, green for truck routes. 45,000 lives reduced to colored pins. His hands were shaking. He'd barely slept in 3 days. A runner entered. "Sir, reconnaissance confirms 734 guards on duty. No change in defensive posture." "Good. Sir, what if they don't run?" Margulis looked up. "Then we'll save whoever we can, and I'll face consequences." The runner left. Margulis returned to his map. 11:16 p.m. 60 seconds until Operation Phantom Army. He thought about his mother, about Warsaw, about silence that had swallowed 16 people he'd loved. Thought about 45,000 he'd never met but would remember forever. The radio operator counted down. 30 seconds. Margulis whispered something. Prayer, maybe, or plea to mathematics and fate. 15 seconds. His hands stopped shaking, became still. 10 seconds. This was it. Everything he believed about numbers and control and the possibility of saving lives through logistics. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Margulis gave the order. Execute. April 16th, 1945, 11:17 p.m. The first sound rolled across German countryside like the voice of God announcing judgment. 12 loudspeakers erupted simultaneously, 121 decibels of recorded armor, tank treads grinding, diesel engines roaring, the mechanical scream of 30 tons of steel moving at speed. The sound came from everywhere. Inside Bergen-Belsen, SS Haupt Sturmführer Werner Schulz jerked awake. For 3 seconds, his mind couldn't process what his ears heard. Then training took over. He grabbed his uniform, his pistol, ran outside. The night sky was black, no moon. But the sounds were unmistakable. Tanks, many tanks, moving closer. "All units to defensive positions," Schultz screamed. his voice barely carried over the mechanical thunder. Guards spilled from barracks half-dressed, fumbling with rifles. Junior officers ran in different directions, shouting contradictory commands. The camp descended into chaos in 90 seconds. At 11:17:45, the first flare ignited. Brilliant orange burst 400 meters north. It climbed, hung like a burning star, illuminating nothing but trees, then began its slow descent, trailing sparks. 30 seconds of light, then darkness. 90 seconds later, another flare, red, 350 meters east. The pattern was deliberate, mathematical, each flare closer. Artillery finding range, walking toward the target. Any soldier who'd experienced bombardment knew what this meant. Ranging shots. The next shells would be high explosive. At 11:22 p.m., Dietrich Neumann's voice crackled across German military radio. Achtung! Panzerabteilung erreicht Gitter 447. His German was flawless. Perfect Hochdeutsch with clipped SS authority. To guards listening on radios, it sounded exactly like their own command structure. Infanterie vorrücken auf Gitter 502. Alle Einheiten, Feindstärke geschätzt auf 6,000 Mann. 6,000 enemy soldiers, converging from multiple directions. Schultz grabbed the radio. This is Bergen-Belsen command, requesting clarification on enemy positions. Over. Static. Then Neumann's voice again, broadcasting general updates. Amerikanische Einheiten von Westen, britische Panzer von Norden, kanadische Infanterie von Osten. An encirclement. Coordinated assault by overwhelming force. Schultz felt something cold in his stomach. This was the end. The moment every SS officer had been dreading, they were about to be captured. And when Allies captured SS officers, when they saw what was inside these camps, there would be no mercy, just trials and nooses. Another flare, closer. Tank sounds growing impossibly loud. At 11:34 p.m., 6 guards broke, simply dropped rifles and ran into darkness. Schultz saw them go, wanted to shoot them for desertion. Couldn't blame them. More flares, more tank sounds, radio chatter painting doom from every direction. At 11:41 p.m., 89 guards abandoned posts. Some stole vehicles. Kubelwagens roaring to life, racing away at speeds that would get men killed, but death by crash was better than death by noose. Others fled on foot, threw away anything marking them SS, ran into forest hoping to disappear. Schultz stood in command post watching his garrison disintegrate. Junior officers screamed for order. Nobody listened. Fear had become contagious. At 11:52 p.m., Schultz made a decision that would save his life. He'd served in Russia, seen real combat. Something about this attack felt wrong. The sounds were too perfect, too regular. Real artillery had rhythm variations, but looking at his panicking men, at flares turning night hellish orange, at radio reports of massive forces, Schultz realized truth didn't matter. His guards were gone or going. 340 had fled. The remaining 394 were on breakdown's edge. If he tried holding position, they'd mutiny. If Allies really were coming, they'd be slaughtered or captured. If this was somehow a trick, he'd rather be wrong and alive than right and dead. All units, he said into radio, evacuate to Reinsdorf rally point. Leave the prisoners. The last guards didn't need to be told twice. By 12:17 a.m., Bergen-Belsen stood silent and empty. 734 guards had abandoned posts without firing a single shot. The gates hung open like a mouth, screaming into darkness. April 16th, 1945. 12:19 a.m. First wave. Canadian trucks rolled through those gates. Private Lorne Mackenzie drove truck 23, hands tight on the wheel, heart hammering. Behind him, 2 medics sat silent. Barbed wire, watchtowers, long wooden barracks built for animals, not people. The smell hit before they stopped. Death and disease and human waste. 45,000 people crammed into space meant for 10,000. Mackenzie killed the engine, jumped down. Boots hit mud that squelched with things he didn't want to think about. He thought about 3 nights ago. The test run at Weissenberg. The bullet that had missed his head by 11 centimeters. Guards who'd run from speakers. This was bigger. 45,000 instead of 400. But the method was the same. He reached the nearest barracks, put his hand on the door, hesitated, then opened it. Faces. Dozens of skeletal faces with enormous eyes staring from wooden bunks stacked 3 high. Bunks meant for 1 but holding 3 or 4, bodies pressed together for warmth. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Mackenzie's Saskatchewan farm German was terrible. Wir sind Kanadier. You are safe. Ihr seid sicher. Still nothing, just hollow eyes. Then an older woman stood, helped another to her feet, took 1 shuffling step. Canada? Her voice was a whisper. Yes, Canada. We're taking you out. All of you, but we have to go now. Schnell. The woman nodded, kept walking. Others began to move. Mackenzie and medics helped them out, gentle hands supporting people who weighed less than children. Bodies, mostly bones. Faces that had forgotten hope, loading them into truck bed. 1, 5, 12, 20, 30. Mackenzie counted each one. His job was 35 per truck, but looking at these people, seeing how small they were, he thought he could fit 40. But Margolis had been specific. 35 maximum. Keep to the numbers. At 34, he saw her, Sarah Kleinman, 19 years old, 72 pounds, dark eyes that had seen too much. She stood beside the truck, one hand on the tailgate, looking at Mackenzie like she didn't quite believe he was real. Mackenzie jumped down. "Can you climb up?" Sarah shook her head. Her legs wouldn't support climbing. Without hesitating, Mackenzie scooped her up. She weighed nothing. Like holding a child. He lifted her into truck bed, settled her against the side. "You're safe," he said in broken German. Then in English, because he didn't know the German words. "You're going home." Sarah looked at him. This young soldier with Saskatchewan mud on boots and gentleness in hands. Looked at other prisoners packed in truck. Looked back toward barracks where she'd spent 2 years waiting to die. "This is real?" she whispered in Yiddish. "Yes." At 12:31 a.m., Truck 23 departed Bergen-Belsen with 34 passengers. Loading time, 5 minutes 12 seconds. The journey to Allied lines was 14.7 kilometers over rough roads. Mackenzie drove as fast as he dared with human cargo that couldn't handle rough bouncing. Behind him, the truck bed was silent, except for quiet crying. Not sad crying, the kind that happens when you've been holding your breath for 2 years and finally remember how to exhale. At 12:59 a.m., Truck 23 crossed into Allied territory. British medics waited. They'd been briefed, but nothing prepared them for what climbed out. Walking skeletons, that's what medics would write in reports later. Sarah Kleinman was carried to a medical tent, given water, a blanket, morphine for pain that comes when your body remembers it's supposed to feel things. A nurse held her hand and said, "You're safe now," in 6 languages. Sarah believed it when the truck started driving away from camp, when she saw barbed wire disappearing behind them, when she realized the gentle Canadian boy wasn't taking them to gas chambers, but to freedom. At 1:04 a.m., Truck 23 began its return journey for a second load. April 16, 1945, 1:17 a.m. Margolis sat in Field Command tent surrounded by maps and radios and controlled chaos. A runner entered every 3 minutes with updates. Truck counts, passenger tallies, route status. Margolis updated his ledger with each number. Wave 1, 67 trucks, average 32 passengers, equals 2,144 evacuated. Wave 2 in progress, 68 trucks loading now. The numbers were good, better than projected. Loading times averaging 4 minutes instead of 5. Drivers finding rhythm, medics getting efficient. It was working. Margolis allowed himself something close to hope. Then at 1:41 a.m., the radio went silent. Truck 89, report status. Static. Truck 89, this is command. Acknowledge. More static. Margolis felt ice in his stomach. Anyone have contact with Sector Charlie? The radio operator shook his head. Nothing from trucks 87 through 91. Entire convoy went dark 4 minutes ago. 12 trucks. Approximately 360 people currently being loaded or in transit. Margolis stared at the map. What if they'd been ambushed? What if guards had rallied? Dispatch scouts, motorcycle reconnaissance, find them. The wait was agony. Every minute those 12 trucks weren't evacuating was a minute multiplied by 360 lives. At 1:49 a.m., the scout returned. Sir, roads blocked. RAF bombing 3 days ago created a crater, 4.7 meters across. Trucks can't pass. Not an ambush, not combat, just geometry, just a hole in the ground. But the effect was the same. Sector Charlie was stalled. Margolis did math instantly. 12 trucks out of commission. That was 420 capacity gone. Times remaining trips equals 1,680 total capacity lost. Nearly 2,000 people who wouldn't be saved because of a bomb crater. Unless. Can they detour? The scout consulted his map. Farm road about 2 kilometers back. Adds 6.8 kilometers to route, Margolis calculated. Margolis. 6.8 extra kilometers at 40 per hour equals 10.2 minutes additional. Times 12 trucks times 3 remaining trips equals 367 minutes added operation time. 6 hours. They didn't have 6 hours, but they didn't need 6 hours all at once. Just needed other sectors to compensate. Order all other sectors to increase passenger loads from 35 to 37. Reduce loading time to 3 minutes. Sector Charlie takes the detour.
His operations officer looked doubtful. Sir, 37 per truck, that's pushing safety limits. Do it. The order went out. Across Bergen-Belsen, drivers packed trucks tighter. Medics worked faster. Everyone pushed harder because somewhere 360 people sat in stalled trucks waiting for mathematics to save them. At 1:56 a.m., Sector Charlie radioed. Found detour, proceeding. At 2:08 a.m., Sector Charlie trucks resumed operations. Total delay, 19 minutes.
Margolis updated his ledger. Still on schedule, barely. April the 16th, 1945, 2:17 a.m. The evacuation continued with mechanical precision. Trucks making third trips, fourth trips, drivers running on adrenaline and coffee, and desperate need to save everyone before dawn, because dawn would reveal the truth, reveal that the massive Allied army was actually 201 trucks and speakers, reveal that 734 guards had fled from recordings. Margolis updated his count every 8 minutes. 31,400 evacuated, 35,890, 39,200, 42,150. Each number represented real people, real lives, not statistics. Lives. At 3:47 a.m., the eastern sky began to pale. Astronomical twilight. Stars fading. They had maybe 90 minutes before full daylight. Reduce loudspeaker volume, Margolis ordered. Stop flares at 0400. The speakers began to fade. Simulated tank sounds growing quieter, as if the Allied army was pulling back. The flares stopped, leaving natural pre-dawn darkness. Inside Bergen-Belsen, the last mobile prisoners were being loaded, but there were others. 873 too sick to move, too weak to walk, dying from typhus, dysentery, starvation. Canadian medics made the impossible choice: stay with the dying or evacuate with the living. 6 medics stayed, brought water, blankets, morphine, held hands of people who'd been abandoned by humanity and promised them they weren't abandoned anymore. British forces would arrive in 6 hours. These 873 would live to see liberation. But for now they lay in darkness while trucks carried away everyone who could still move. At 4:23 a.m., the last mobile prisoner was loaded into truck 167. The driver closed the tailgate gently, looked at faces staring back. 38 people packed into space meant for 30, all looking at him like he was performing a miracle. He wasn't performing a miracle, he was just driving a truck. But sometimes that's what miracles look like. At 4:31 a.m., truck 167 departed Bergen-Belsen. The camp fell silent behind it. Empty barracks, open gates, abandoned towers. At 4:43 a.m., truck 167 crossed into Allied lines. The radio operator turned to Margolis. "Sir, all trucks accounted for. Evacuation complete." Margolis sat very still. He'd been awake 37 hours, running on coffee and desperation and mathematics that shouldn't have worked, but did. "Give me final numbers." The ledger clerk read from his tally. Total evacuated, 44,127. Too sick to transport, 873. Survival rate, 98.06%. Canadian casualties? 2 injured. Truck 34 collision with truck 35 in darkness. Both drivers minor injuries, no fatalities. German casualties? 0. No combat engagement occurred. Margolis closed his eyes. Let the numbers sink in. 44,127 people saved. 2 Allied casualties, both minor. 0 deaths. His hands started shaking. The tremor he'd suppressed for 37 hours, finally breaking through. Guy Simons entered the tent, stood looking at Margolis, at exhausted officers, at the map covered in pins tracking an impossible operation. He walked to Margolis, extended his hand. "Colonel, you just rewrote every textbook on warfare." Margolis shook his hand, tried to speak, couldn't. His throat had closed. "Go sleep," Simon said quietly, "or you've earned it." Margolis nodded, stood, walked out into pre-dawn darkness. He made it 50 meters before his legs gave out. Sat hard on cold ground, put his face in his hands, and wept, not from joy, not from relief, from the terrible weight of 44,127 lives that hadn't died tonight, from knowing 873 had been left behind, from the impossible mathematics of deciding who lived and who waited, from being one man with a notebook who'd gambled everything on loudspeakers and won. A medic found him 20 minutes later, helped him to a tent, gave him a cot and blanket. Margolis slept for 14 hours straight. April 18th, 1945, 11:23 a.m. Berlin. The telegram arrived at the Führerbunker during breakfast.